Hello, you have reached another segment of Can We Have a Conversation? I have two distinguished guests. One is Dr. Alice Allen Erving. She's a Christian psychologist who has also worked in the clinical field in clinical social work for 25 years. And then we have another guest who's former dean, Reverend Floyd Thompkins. He's former dean at Princeton and Stanford universities. He's a senior pastor who has created several nonprofit organizations around this country. And I am your host, Stewart Perrilliat. One of the things I want to ask is, why is mental health in the Black community important?
Well, it's important for a lot of reasons. First of all, it's important anywhere. Mm-hmm. We cannot exist in this country at this moment mm-hmm. with all the trauma that is happening in all communities and not say that PTSD plus the continuation of what's going on, that we shouldn't address that. And for the Black community, there's some realities that's really interesting. The RAND Corporation has just said that 85% of African Americans identify themselves as Christian. They may not all go to church, mm-hmm. but they respect that organizations on topics that's important. And what's really great is what's happening in your research about why you think it's important.
Absolutely. And you know, about 3/4 of Americans identify as Christians. Mm-hmm. So therefore, Christians, it's not that we don't suffer depression at the same rate as others. It's important that we bring it to the forefront and discuss the importance of addressing depression and suicide ideation within the faith communities. Mm-hmm. So this in itself is unique and really important that we make a strong conversation today about how we can help within the African American community, Christians who are suffering from depression and suicide ideation.
And understand something about faith, right? That in point of fact, faith is not simply what happens on Sunday morning. Mm-hmm. And that in point of fact, people of faith are very different from religious folk. Religious mm-hmm. folk maybe come to church every once in a while, but faithful people look to faith as a source of the strength of their life. Mm-hmm. Now, it's like working with one hand behind your back if you don't have mental health there too. Mm-hmm. Suddenly you have all of these issues that are coming up and you don't even know how to access that particular reality. For instance, when there's self-talk in the Bible, there's all kinds of things in the Word that's there that we need to take advantage of and take access to. The problem is that I don't know if churches necessarily embrace, Center for Innovation and Ministry, one of the innovations that we're seeing that we're looking at is how do churches embrace the ministry of mental health and how does it carry it out, and specifically how do African Americans, because as you know, we're working on this particular topic. What we said and what we know is that communities that have been historically harmed, that are been mistrustful of authority figures, they have a hard time sometimes admitting when there's a problem mm-hmm. and admitting somehow when they have to do something. I think your research talked about that a little bit, didn't it?
Yes. So my research was exploring the role of shame and stigma mm-hmm. surrounding suicidal depression mm-hmm. among Christians. And what my research has shown is that Christians feel as though that they cannot go within the faith communities to say, listen, mm-hmm. I am suffering from this mental condition. Mm-hmm. I am here to get help, but the issue is that that help is not there within the faith community. Mm-hmm. So what do we do about that? How do we engage the faith communities? And I'm speaking of ministers and pastors. Mm-hmm. How do we engage them in this conversation mm-hmm. in terms of helping the parishioners to get the help that they need? Yes, religion, most research out there indicates that religion is looked at as a protective factor. Mm-hmm. However, religion can go the other angle, that it can be a detriment, mm-hmm. because if we're not dealing with the truth and the fact about, yes, mental illness affect every community, everybody in the community. But because we solely rely on the Word of God, how can we use that tool of this Word to help people move through the spectrum of saying, it's okay? Move that shame, move away the stigma that's attached to mental illness. And I think if we start in the faith community, then we will see a lot of people being healed and helped. And the faith community really needs to think about saying, it's okay, you in a safe zone. We may not have the skill set and the tools to help you. However, let's merge with some professionals who have that skill set. I think it could be done.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and one of the things that I think we have to be honest about is that notion of shame and judgment has sometimes been created as a confessionally as a pastor from the pulpit. I mean, at some point we have said and there are probably someone here watching who would love to tell their pastor or their church, that I am taking, that I have to take some pills for mental health, or there are someone else that says I am depressed. But if they go to certain churches and certain pastors, then what's wrong with you? You haven't prayed hard enough, or maybe even you're possessed. And what's really interesting is that Jesus didn't have a problem with this topic.
Right.
We have a little demoniac thing that happens, right? And so clearly Jesus saw mental health and the reality of the epileptic woman who go on the ground. I mean, literally, a lot of the miracles in the New Testament are about Jesus healing mental conditions or physical conditions, and yet now in the church we have said that perfection is what you're supposed to be if you're spiritually right. And in point of fact, if we were spiritually right, we wouldn't have needed a cross.
That's right.
That's
We
right.
wouldn't have needed a Christ, and we certainly wouldn't need someone else to open. The other thing is, if you're from a church that has an altar, you see the repetitive nature of the same people coming every week. And so then churches feel like they're failing because, quite frankly, I lay hands, I put oil, I call it out every week, and nothing happens. Well, what happens if the Lord is saying, yeah, I got another tool? And in fact, I've called somebody in the congregation specifically with these tools, or I've called someone that can do something, but you're not using all the tools. You're stuck in this one thing because you want to know that when you laid hands, it happened, not when the Spirit of the Lord did it, however the Spirit of the Lord wanted to do it. So I think we have to be clear about the theological implications of this, because arrogance can kill a church, and a sense of guilt that we create can actually cause a higher incidences of suicide. Because I can't imagine the worst thing is to have the one place that have always been the place of giving you strength become the one place you can't exercise because of what they might say about you if you say I'm weak. What happens to Jesus? What happened to the text that says, in your weakness, he made you strong?
Absolutely.
Right. That leads to my next question. How is this different? How is it unique?
How is what is different?
When we talk about the church, and you're actually just already touching on these things, but when we talk about mental health and the community mental health in the church, the work that you all are doing with pastors, not thinking that this is important, using just the word when it could be the word and the help. How is this different? How is it unique?
Well, I think that is unique because first we're having a conversation. Because historically there has always been a division between the church and psychology. And I think what we're seeing now that there is a great need to put these two factors together to talk about it, because we see it every day in the news. We see it manifesting within our own faith communities where members who may be suffering from depression, bipolar, schizophrenia, and we think, as the doctor said, you could just pray this away. Well, you just can't pray mental illness away. It's unique in the sense that we should be open to bring mental health professionals in and combine with the spiritual.
Good.
Through my study, one of the theoretical frameworks that I used was cognitive Christian behavioral therapy. It's all scriptural based. So why wouldn't we? That in itself is unique.
Right.
We have the foundation of the Word of God. So why don't we use it to help with the healing process?
Very good. Very good.
And at the Center for Innovation and Ministry at SFTS, as you know, this is one of our emerging as one of the most major issues in all churches, but in African American churches specifically. Monica Coleman has just finished a 6-week study online and of her book Bipolar Faith. This is a African American woman who is herself suffering, or she's bipolar, diagnosed bipolar, and she's brought it into her ministry. And we train folks to go now into the church to talk about how do you create in the church these spaces that mental illness, and people can talk about mental illness. They also talk about rape. They also talk about people who are going through divorce and people who go in depression, because this is real life. This is really what's happening that's going on. And then every 3 to 6 months we do another totally online in which we have mental health professionals, psychiatrists, pastoral care people, and some theological students that sit together. Because when you are when you're in treatment or when you are in conversation, you don't leave the church and go into mental health.
Right.
Normally, there's a pastor in someone's life, and also there's a mental health professional there. So the ability to talk to one another and know how to help each other. There are things that you do as a mental health professional I don't want to do, ain't interested, right? And there should be things that mental health professionals should be able to do that says that's not what I do. Now, sometimes the problem is not that they step on each other's territories, but sometimes they don't understand each other.
Absolutely.
And when that happens, then you have a person in the middle who's getting conflicting advice or seemingly conflicting advice, when in point of fact, with a little bit of understanding each other, it would be the same thing. So what do they have to do with one another? They have everything to do with one another. You should not have to separate yourself into different beings in order to take advantage of both of these, right? And Christian psychiatrists and Christian psychologists and marriage and family health, there are a lot of people out there. The question is, don't be afraid, and neither should pastors be afraid, to say to folks, come on in the congregation, help us be a part of that, because we both need that. We both need the pastoral care, and we need the mental health care. So that's why it's different. It's also different for anybody of any faith, because as in your research, which is it
was placed in a multicultural.
Right.
Church.
So it's not just let's as they say, don't get it twisted. It's not because black folks are more mentally ill than anybody, right?
Right.
It's just that literally we are trying to figure out how, as a Christian organization, to actually get involved with everybody.
Absolutely.
And that's really good because, dealing with mental health, we all have it, especially as African Americans. And it goes back to, slavery and how we've been separated and divided. And then we deal with the trauma with the police, and we deal with, there's so many things as an African American race that we deal with that has been characterized as something else other than mental health. And if you think about the Bible, there was no one that just did something, just trusted God. God always used somebody. He used some vehicle. He used something to help them. And it sounds like this is what you're saying. You're saying, hey, it doesn't have to be either or. You have to just go to a physician, or you just got to trust God. But it can be both. Is that correct?
Correct. They all can work together for the good of those who are suffering with that immediate issue.
Amen.
And it's also that we have to teach. This is my mental health professionals. It's really important for the profession to understand that, and I think sometimes folks who are in a profession who are not people of faith themselves, we need to understand that there's a Western sensibility that in order to do mental health is between the patient and the practitioner, and the community may or may not have. In fact, you can't even allow the community involved. That's not true, because at some point, the community really involves, because there's this thing called racism, which we need to name at this table, right? Which allows you to say, wait a minute, all my problems are not my doing. I didn't
That's
create
right.
it. Right.
Right.
Yes,
And
right.
it ain't crazy to be paranoid when folk are after you.
Right.
So, so at some point,
Yes.
and you have a practitioner who kind of doesn't understand that.
Right.
Then, in point of fact, you have the other thing that's happening, which is without that kind of inclusion and in connection with pastors, you got then mental health professionals who would turn off somebody.
Absolutely.
Because they don't know what's going on. Therefore, I need to go on. I can do bad all by myself,
Right.
right?
Yes.
Because the other thing is, and I don't want to go on. That's really interesting. When I was in the pastorate, how many people developed some of the worst expressions of their mental illness as a protective measure, and so they're not going to let it go
No.
until there's another way, till they find safety in another way, and that's one of the connections. Like, I act like this because I've been hurt enough when I didn't. And so you got to convince me I can lay down, as Peter, I can put down my sword
Yes.
because the presence of Jesus is here,
Yes.
right? I got to be convinced that. Other than that, I'll keep the sword. It's working.
Yes, right.
I haven't been cut lately.
Yes, right.
One of the things that I even experienced by doing a focus group with young men in Marin City was they were talking about ways that they can help these young people in mental health areas. And they were saying, now that we've given you an opportunity to make a decision or tell us what you need about mental health, how is this working for you? And they said, well, it's not. And they said, well, why isn't it? Well, first of all, there's nobody that we're talking to that looks like us. Second is when we tell them our story, they make us feel worse than we did before we told them. They go, oh, no, not you. Did that really happen to you? And so I guess it leads to the questions, why don't African Americans take advantage of these services in their churches when they know that they're offered to them?
You want to take that one?
I
This is
would
her
say,
study.
I'll just mention approximately like 3 factors through some of the statistics of my study. One, weak faith. You have to think about that. Weak faith. You in the church, you're coming, presenting some issues. The first thing people will say, you don't believe in God. Your faith is so weak, that's why you are suffering from these conditions. So that right there is a factor for people not to be able to feel comfortable to take advantage of those services. Okay. Then you have the shame and the stigma. You have to put yourself out there to say, I am suffering with this condition, but then do you really have the tools to help your members within the faith community? Another factor, education. That's a big factor. Understanding the mental health symptoms. If we provide that service within the church, then I think some of the parishioners will come forth. But you got to have those safety measures in place for them to feel safe to come talk about it. And how do you feel safe? I think it starts when you have your leaders, your pastors, your ministers say, it's okay. We know it exists. Or being transparent. I too have suffered, am suffering from such conditions. So what can we do as a community of people to help us?
And, the good people of Kaiser Permanente has given the Center for Innovation and Ministry a grant to actually study and look at that. So and we've actually talked to 50 churches and faith leaders, African American in the Bay Area. Dr. Peter Goldblum and Reverend Dr. Mark Wilson have been the 2 principal people that have done this, and their research is same thing. They put it in different words. One is we don't want everybody to know our business. Okay, that we have to be trustful, trustworthy, and that means I got to trust the community, and that also means I got to trust the folk that when I talk to, they understand. Because I don't want to have to be translating myself in order to get healed, right? And so we know that's a major factor. The second thing is mental health is being, when it is being delivered well in African American churches, I can say this, not usually the pastors doing it. Doesn't mean pastors aren't doing it well. Do not call that man, and don't call me and say that. But what it means is there are it's usually mothers of the church, health clubs, those kind of folks. It's broader than that. So the notion that what the preacher can do is set the context.
Absolutely.
The preacher does not. That's what the unique role. And I think sometimes when I talk to pastors, they're like, "I don't know enough." No, just preach and set the context. And the congregation within itself seems to have resiliency,
Absolutely.
motherboard, and other folks will get involved in it. An example is a part of our study is the LGBTQ folks who are part of that, who've been particularly hurt. But even they said, if the pastor would just say from the pulpit, right, that it's all right for me to talk about this stuff, I can figure out, even in this context, how to get help. So that while pastors may not be the deliverer of it, the contextual, that idea of having somebody set that context to say, you're not wrong, you're not bad, and that God really wants to hear. I mean, the incarnation itself says that God thinks that human experience is important, right? As we are. As we are. Well, as I say often in my sermon, and you know this, is that it is not important and not interesting that we believe in God. What's important is that God believes in us.
Absolutely.
That's the thing that blows our mind, and that's what this gets to.
Yes, and we have the tools.
Yeah.
And what is that tool? The greatest tool in the world, the Word of God. Everything that we need to help set people free.
Yes.
It's right there.
It's in the Word. You know, I guess one of the things is the transparency among
Yeah, that's
pastors.
really important.
It you know, and some people get it wrong. They think transparency is a sign of weakness, and it exposes them and makes them vulnerable. So why do you think a pastor will not say, "I struggle with this," or "You should get some help"? Or, I'm just throwing that out there.
Well, let me be personal on this, right? Because I'm a person that was diagnosed as autistic when I was a child, right? And I took a lot of mental health, and my parents were told to put me in a mental institution because I was just that quote unquote gone. And so, from the perspective of the medical folks, they said, in fact, can't do anything about it. Now, it wouldn't happen now because people understand autism differently, right? But it was only because my mama and daddy had faith, right? See, you understand? So that's the way to look at mental health. See, they're like, okay, you know, he needs to see, and they let me see all this, like, but it's like, but one thing I want you to understand, your view can only go so far. God takes it the rest of the way. And they found somebody to work that way. And Dr. Fougier, who's the guy I saw for years, he was not a person of faith, and he would go, okay, I don't understand the rest of this. You shouldn't be who you are. But the fact that he was willing to say humbly, I don't understand everything is important. Now, when I tell that, for a long time, I didn't put that in my biography because they would look and say, he crazy.
That's right.
And now I go, you know, I am. And that really is how God calls everybody in the Bible's crazy
Right.
to some degree, right?
Right.
Yes.
So that became, and being able in the presence of other people to have that kind of freedom is important. But the fear of it is absolutely fear. Well, like I said, when I was diagnosed, the idea was his life will not be what you want it to be. Then if I would have said it when I was saying it as a preacher, then it was he's crazy and we don't know what is going to go on, right? And so that's real fear. That is real, understandable fear. I can just tell you from living on the other side, it's kind of real free to be who you are
Absolutely.
and say God calls all of this uniqueness into doing something that cannot be done by anybody other than you.
Absolutely. Yes. And that's attached to the shame and the stigma.
Yeah.
You know, and those myths about, oh, I can't share that because I'm crazy. You know, we have to move beyond that.
We have to move beyond that.
Let me ask each one. I'll start with you.
Can I also say one
Yes.
other thing? It's also okay to be okay and then go through something that you need help with.
Yes.
You know, because the other thing we're talking about mental illness because you know you have to talk in certain categories, but also people move in and out of times when they need help and not help. So just because I went through something now, it doesn't mean that will always be what I will be.
Absolutely.
And that's the other problem is that the stigma is the label. Right?
Absolutely.
And it's like, what if we took the label off?
Take
and just
the label
said,
off.
Right, and just say, this is just a part of ministry. Just like your leg got broken. Right?
That's right.
Now, two things. You will get healed. You might walk with a limp or you may not,
Absolutely.
depending
Right.
on how it heals.
That's right.
But that's what the analogy we need to be looking
Right.
at.
So how did you get to this topic, this discussion, this dissertation?
My dissertation topic?
What was the push to say, okay, I need to write about this?
Well, since you asked me that question, that topic came to me through God. A prophetic word was spoken over my life, and I said, Lord, what is it that you want me to write about? And the topic just flowed, exploring the role of shame and stigma surrounding suicidal depression among Christians. He gave me a mandate to go in the faith communities to educate, to teach about stigma and shame. Depression, suicide ideation. It's rampant in our churches. And we have to call it out. And we have to be able to be equipped to help our parishioners with this issue. I mean, there are some mega churches who have suffered greatly, who children have committed suicide. And now they're doing great work. Rick Warren, right? If you would have kept that a secret, how are you going to help other people in that congregation?
Absolutely. What about you, Floyd? How did you come to, working with the Center of Innovation Ministry?
Well, it's one of those things that it's a ministry that chose us. We didn't choose it, right? And that's what happens, right? All ministry happens that way.
Right.
If the ministry that you chose is going to fail, the ministry that chose you is going to succeed. That's just how it happens, right? And so we actually hadn't really, I've been here for 2 years, and we were putting together where's the cutting edge? What is it that's important for the church to be engaged in at this moment, right? And it is very clear, the zeitgeist of this moment is to actually say mind, body, and spirit, right?
Yes.
And it's amazing that our, the person who came on to be our partner in this, which is Kaiser, that's also one of the major things they do, mind, body, and spirit. You recognize that and you say, wow, that is what synergy is all about. Secondarily, in all the issues that happen at the center, it's pastors coming to us and people coming to us saying, this is what we feel we cannot do that we have to be doing, And seminary, my job in the seminary is not to just educate and involve folks who are there, but actually to be looking out and to be in ministry now with people in ministry and people who are not in ministry. The third thing is that happened, social justice is our main thing. Social justice is always this kind of political activism and whatever, but a whole, let me use a technical term, a whole heap of what happened in social justice is mental illness, quite frankly.
Right.
Yes.
A lot of people get on the street homeless because of untreated mental illness,
Absolutely.
right? A lot of the violence that happened to black men and whatever, police violence or whatever, but a lot of it is because the number one deliverer of mental health, unfortunate services are police. Because people have to, because this thing hasn't been addressed until it became a problem. Then the police are called, and then folks are put on hold. And so a lot of times that's how people get into mental health. As long as that happens, that's a problem, right? And so it becomes clear that if you're involved in social justice, right, you ought to be involved also with the context of mental illness. Again, in Monica's class, one of the things she talks about, and one of the most compelling classes was about, which I don't usually take the class, but I had to be in the class, was about rape, right? And how the church is not supporting people who are being raped or who have been raped, because we try to tell them, okay, now you got to forgive and reconcile. what? I got to reconcile with my rapist? No, it actually doesn't say that in the word.
No, it
No.
doesn't.
But
No,
a lot of churches don't get that. That's the whole point. And then you get the re-injuring, or then you get somebody who literally takes his or her personality and throws it away, and then becomes a victim rather than a survivor who got stronger. Those kinds of things. So that's what got us into this, the dynamic of ministry, about social justice, and the reality of what we are. We are not your, hopefully CIM is not your average seminary. We really want to partner and collaborate with people who are moving forward. And this is why I'm happy to see you and meet this young lady today. And this new, when did you get the doctorate?
Graduated last August,
Well,
August
hello.
2017.
Everybody, congratulations.
Thank
Yes.
you.
I want to go back and touch on something. First of all, I didn't introduce you as the director because you have a lot of other titles and I talked about your past, but you are the director of the Center of Innovation Ministry at San Francisco Theological Seminary. And you said something about police and you talked about social justice. Let's talk about the incident that happened in Sacramento. And I just want to know what is some of your thoughts about mental health and about what has happened with this young man that was killed by the police and his family, and what's your thoughts on that?
First of all, one of the things that happen that people don't realize, because we also looked at policing in the center, right, and things like that, is that remember, every child that's killed in our community ends up in our churches, whether they went to that church or not. So this is not something that pastors, we've all done. I've done funerals of people who have died because of injustice, right? And they will come to our church and their family. And so what I really galls me to sometime is how children who have been killed and their lives are politicized, right? Pastors can't afford that. We actually have to deal with families, right? And the second thing is that some of these children who are being killed are not perfect. And I'd love to live in a world where a black child don't have to be perfect to live, and so that's the other thing is we have to deal with the political reality, Reverend Brian in Baltimore. We have to deal with the political reality of the community. We have to deal with the pastoral reality of the family. And then finally, we have to translate that reality to people who are not like us. When I was in Charlottesville, Virginia, one of the things that was the most interesting thing is that the Black Lives Leader. We have some folks in that was because there are three women who started it from the Bay Area. And one of the politicians was talking to me and said, I just think there was a militant Black Lives Matter, and she's a woman, and I said, look, let me tell you something. Those three women, and then she said, oh, they're lesbian women. I said, okay, hold on. Those three women were saying their children matter. You can't understand that as a mama? That's when she got it. Somehow, one of the things that we have to do as a pastor is to not let our children become causes or not let them become statistics, but real people, some of whom we know were not perfect, but we also know if you get a black male to 29, right, their life's going to be different. And we know there's going to be issues. I mean, there's statistical reality is that we don't believe, you meet somebody, I mean, think about all of y'all out there. When y'all were 14, 15, 16 years old, y'all were crazy too, right? Thank God you didn't get killed for being crazy. Our kids get killed for being crazy.
That's
Absolutely.
right.
That's the difference.
That's good.
I'm probably preaching too much now. I'm not a show. But my passion is, and then let me also tell you, the other thing is the police. I don't know how, maybe for the world, they in our congregations too.
That's right.
And so we've all had the pastor police, and we know what happens when they're in that situation. And when we did the forum at SFTS, I got mail because they said, well, you're being anti-police. Because one of the things I reminded people is in the 70s were the highest death rate of police that were getting shot, right? And by in the late 80s, they were down to a very small number. And the difference is they got involved in communities, right? Is that police now feel like there's no support of the community. The bad acting police are making them have problems also. So the mental health that's happening among police are problematic. And so we really do also have to pastor that. So my concern is on a pastoral level with social justice in it. And it's that ball of issues that are there. And I cry and weep for everybody in that situation. And at the same time, all that weeping don't cause me not to see the things have to change, right? And that is something, the policy of if you draw your guns, what we found out in our course, right? If you draw your guns, the police draw their guns and shoot, they're supposed to empty it. If they don't, they can actually get reprimanded. That crazy stuff got to change.
Yes.
So,
Well, they actually shot the guy 20 times.
right, because if you draw the gun, you literally, you can't shoot him once.
Right.
You can get reprimanded for shooting once.
Right.
You have to, because the idea is that this was one of those. The idea is that if you draw the gun, you have to be in a life-threatening situation, and you have to deploy lethal force.
Yes. You know, Dr. Erving, I want to ask you, with your studies and your research and everything, where do we go from here?
Oh boy, we go from here. We have to be open for a dialogue of how we're going to help our people in the community that's affected by mental illness. You know, you may have heard this many times before. It comes down to education. It comes down to education. Teaching about mental illness. You know, you mentioned about the police. We have to show some compassion for them as well. Why? Because of the PTSD, the trauma that they suffer every day. We're not saying that is right, that, you know, our black men are being shot, you know, for no reason. Yes, we all have some issues. Communities have issues. But we have to do a better job at protecting our black males in the community. And we have to do more education with the police system. We just have to.
What about you, Floyd? Well, where do we go next?
Well, you know, I got stuff for you to do. Actually, if you're interested at all, first of all, go to our website, innovation.sfts.edu, and then look at our seminars. We have a seminar coming up. April 10th is when it starts. And that seminar is about this. It is literally about getting churches. It's called Spirituality and Mental Health. And it's our base course to kind of talk about how to talk to each other, how to deal with that, and how mental health professionals and religious folks can work together. It is practical, and if you're in any of the professions, also you can get continuing education credit. If you go to the site and you decide, hey, this is too expensive, I think it's $300, right? If you can email me at Innovation there, and just mention this program, and I'll give you a deal half off, so it's $150, right? Because we want people to do that, only if you do this. So that's one. There's a Grieving Between Heaven and Earth, 3-day seminar that's also happening in May. And that one is broader because that one is not for Christians, that's only Christians. That is for, they go from everywhere from Native American practices to Christians, because a lot of what happens is, especially if you're in the even if you're a Christian, you need to understand how other people grieve and what's going on, right? Rather than say, no, you got to do it this way because that ain't gonna work. And then we'll be Monica will be coming back again in the fall. So innovation.sfts.edu. Look under our seminars. Register now, and also shoot me an email at Innovation, and I'll shoot you a code so you don't have to. It is really. It's all online. You don't have to come to Marin County. I understand. Don't have to get over the Richmond Bridge. Don't have to go and literally spend some time with some amazing people. We have 3 or 4 different professors in there who are teaching, and we do case studies, which means it's not people talking to you. the people in the thing will say, how do you handle this? Because that's really important, because there are always different ways to handle it. So that's how we would do it. You asked the question, so.
Well, I want to know because the show is, can we have a conversation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it does no good to anyone if there's not any follow-up or if there's no continuation or any action taken. I mean, we can have a conversation all day, but if we're not active in the conversation and making steps forward to try to make this known to the community and to the public that, mental health is serious. Not only is it serious, even with, as you said, the police officers, this should be something that police officers, before they can even be on the force, that this should be some kind of training or something to educate them before they become police officers. And even the ones that's on the force, that they are awareness, and some kind of awareness about mental health.
And honestly, police officers do get a pretty good amount of
Good.
training on mental health, right?
Yes.
But mental health as an ethnicity, they really don't as much as they need to.
Absolutely.
And that's really different. So let me ask you: are you going to do workshops with suicide and things like that?
Well, yes. Well, currently I've been invited to some faith-based churches to go in to do some workshop around depression and suicide ideation. So that's my goal, that's my passion, to continue to do work. And so I welcome anyone to contact me if they're interested in having me come to their churches to do any workshops.
And what do you know about suicide? Because that kind of workshop is really important because it creates a space for people to actually not only start talking about it.
Yes.
You will be surprised how many people in a congregation like that will finally say, yeah, I've been thinking about it and I need help.
Absolutely.
And unless you do that,
Open the
it
dialogue.
will not happen.
That's right.
And people will die silently.
Absolutely.
And so it is really important. What your work is really important. As a director of Center, I get a whole bunch of emails about why don't you look at this? Why don't you look? And we can't look at everything, but I think you have a unique topic with a powerful influence, and especially because there's a myth among African Americans that we don't do suicide.
Right.
That is
Absolutely.
a seriously
myth.
big myth, right?
Absolutely.
And so a lot of folks, and I'm going to say it. See, that's why I don't pastor no more, so that somebody don't come up to me roll up to me on Sunday morning and say, But a lot of folk have lied in their funerals because it has been a suicide, but the family decides not to say it.
Absolutely.
And then, somebody just died, and you're sitting there going, "Nah, I don't," and you just let it go, right?
Yes.
And so that's the problem. That's why we sometimes don't see the numbers that are real in the Black community,
Yes.
because we are captive to that myth, and that myth is killing us. And so it's not that this. And so I'm sure that the phenomenon happens to you that after you do it, someone say, well, you done created it. No, you just really allowed the dialogue to stop it.
Yes.
Because it's going on. Right?
Yes. So death by suicide is a serious issue within the faith communities. And, that big question about, you took your life.
Yeah.
What does that mean with you and your spirituality, with your belief? Where do you go? Hell? Heaven? Those are a lot of questions.
No, absolutely. I was, and a part of my dissertation, well, actually my thesis was talking about urban young men in Oakland, and it gave a statistic on suicide among African American males. But the statistics were back in 2002, 3, so they didn't even bring you up to date of now, which it's probably so much larger. But the thing is, to me, it seemed like it wasn't an issue, and that's why the census didn't cover it, or why they didn't talk about these statistics, which is an issue. It's a major issue, and I'm trying to figure out why wasn't the statistics posted after 2002? And
You just hit on that.
yeah, no,
Some
no,
of that shame and that stigma,
I
we
get it,
know,
but
yes.
and so, with that said,
It's a general prejudice. I mean, for Black males, it's a little bit more complicated. For us in general, with Black males, there's death by cop, right? There's also the self-medication that's happening with drugs, right? And there's also a lot of the anger and the internal violence is because there's an incredible amount of abuse that is going on that's not being dealt with, and
Yes.
therefore it externalizes itself. All of those are like I said, all of those sound like social justice issues, and they are, but they're mentally.
Yes, I was
their
going to
mental
say,
health, they're
the
really,
core.
they're the core. I mean, literally.
That's to the root of the cause.
Yeah.
It's always that basis there's some mental illness.
Yes.
The
Yeah.
core foundation.
One would say the
of this
gang
behavior.
culture in general is a replacement of a family, a dysfunctional family. So they just replace it with a dysfunctional family that I feel better about because I get to hurt other people, you know, rather than just be hurt. So one would say, you know, if you want to get at the issues of Chicago, you also, it's not just preventative and it's not just afterwards, but actually the thing is, if you do that well, you actually might in fact bring down the statistic also. So that's just another way of doing it. It's a three-dimensional approach.
And that's why we're having a conversation today, right?
Absolutely.
You know, I'm grateful for my study, the work that I have done to start getting these numbers, the statistics out there so people to know, so we can do a better job in educating our community of people.
Well, I want to thank the both of you for coming. You know, these are not conversations that we have every day. There are conversations that's needed every day, but for whatever reason, we don't have them. And so I am honored to have both of you on this show, and I would like for you to, you know, tell the people how they can reach you. And I'll start with you, Dr. Erving. Can you give them your information? It should be posted, but just...
Yes, I could be reached at, my email address is aallene49@gmail.com. It's Allen Consulting, so it's my name, and I
Okay.
could be reached there.
Thank you.
Two things. I've put mine out there because I've been media trained, so I kept to going to innovation.sfps.edu. That's the 9th time I've said it. But I also want to say something to somebody who might be watching today. You are not broken. In fact, that what you think may destroy you may become your blessing.
Absolutely.
We're meeting in Good Friday, right after Good Friday. And it is often the case that the suffering of a present age ends up being the resurrection of another age. The issue is get through it and get help. Second thing is you're not being weak by asking for help.
Absolutely.
You're being blessed. You're allowing someone to use their gifts that God has given them to help you, without which you cannot be who you should be.
Yes.
And third, by your silence or your suffering, you are letting the enemy destroy you and us in a way that can easily be changed by simply saying, I too. So even if you don't contact us, contact somebody else, especially if you are a young person. Be very clear. It don't feel like now you can get through it, but you will. And people want to help you get through whatever you're going through. And on the other side, you actually will be the perfect person to help somebody else.
Yes.
So it may not be an accident that you stumble onto this show to remind you and to say to you, your hurt is not eternal. Your pain is not forever. And you're not broken. You're in the process of being blessed.
Amen. And I like to just say that there are 3 powerful words that you can use. I need help. Ask for it. Don't be afraid. And even within your faith communities, if you don't have those people there equipped, skilled enough to help you, someone would direct you where you could get help. It's okay to get help outside of the faith community. We have to work together. So if you need help, and if you're out there today suffering, help is available to you.
Amen. Well, I want to close in prayer, and I want you to pray about this topic, and that not only the topic, but the family in Sacramento, and those that are struggling with mental health. Because like you said, someone is watching this show, and they said, you know what, I never knew, but that's me. I'm struggling with mental health issues, and I didn't even know it. And so I'm asking that you would seal this show in prayer.
Okay. Thank you, brother, by the way, for creating this space.
Amen.
It's really important. Gracious God, in whom we live and have our being, we thank you for the opportunity to speak the truth, that we all have things and issues in our lives, and that you've made a provision for. Thank you, Jesus, for being here, for dying on the cross, for rising again, and for saying that our brokenness did not define us. The way in which we heal does. Now we pray for those who are going through the grieving process in Sacramento. All who are involved in that situation. Let justice roll down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream, and let peace reign in that place. Let healing take place in that family. And let the glory of the Lord be revealed as human beings show themselves to be greater than we ever thought they could be. God, we thank you for those who have participated around this table, for those who are watching right now. And we thank you that the Spirit of the living God is raising young people, as well as those who have been around for a while, to now speak the truth. Now to be loving, now to be opening, and now to see healing. In the name of the Creator, Redeemer, and Giver of life, in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Amen. Well, you've watched another segment. You heard it here about mental health. You have a little bit more understanding about how to deal with some of these issues. And so, as they said today, get some help. Even if it's a family member, a loved one, or even if it's yourself. This is important. This is real. And we care about you, and God loves you. Until the next time, God bless you.